1989 was the year when the Chinese Communist Party, also known as CCP, was threatened by democracy protests in China. Scared to the extent that CCP announced the attack against its citizens to curb the protests. It is surprising to see similar instances taking place in China over the last few weeks. If you aren't aware of the crisis that took place in 1989, then you must watch this video till the end. Hello, and welcome to our channel today. We are going to talk about the presently ongoing crisis in China mortgage crisis. While renting houses in China through a mortgage is not so easy, we presume. Over thousands of homeowners stopped paying mortgages in observance of the protest. CCP being CCP had already sent tanks to maintain peace in the respective area. The said protest is over the frozen bank assets, as the biggest banks and real estate industries in China are at risk of making a default of $9 trillion given as a loan, which could lead to a massive recession in China. And of course, the fall of CCP. According to an expert, this mortgage crisis can be 100 times worse than the 2008 financial crisis. We hope our video does not come into China's scrutiny and reaches your feed as we post it, so here we are taking a risk to make a video on the Chinese crisis, hoping that no tanks are headed towards us after this, and all we ask you is to hit the like button. Jokes apart. Before getting into the real reasons behind such a crisis, let's find out how the Chinese economy ended up in such a devastating situation as it is now. There is a high demand for real estate in China as it significantly affects the life of Chinese citizens in every aspect. The real estate industry has only gone up in the last couple of decades as it is the most trustable class of industries by the public. The craze for buying real estate in China is analogous to the 2008 housing market in the USA, where everyone wants to buy real estate because the prices were only going up. It increased so much that the real estate owners started selling the property even before the building was constructed. Apartments sat empty with owners, but without inhabitants in hope of price appreciation. Thereby, the supply increased drastically to match the demand of the properties. You would believe that Chinese families have 70% of their wealth intact in real estate, and they are not very diversified. Evergrande took the advantage and established itself as the biggest real estate company in China. In 2018, it was the biggest real estate company in Asia. You know, the bigger the facade is, the bigger is the trust. Being such a big venture in Asia, people believe that everything was legally done by Evergrande. In reality, it was far from being legitimate. Remember when we mentioned that the urge to invest or own properties through real estate was so much that people bought it even before breaking down the grounds for construction. Companies like Evergrande would lease the government properties and then build houses on it, after which they take the full amount of those houses from the prospective buyers. Companies never faced issues in selling the houses as the demand was so high. People would even resort to mortgages just to own a real estate property in future. Companies like Evergrande would not use the amount received by the buyers, whose houses are supposed to be built by these companies. Rather, they take that money and buy new lands so that they can send more apartments. Seems like a big problem to us. From an unbiased perspective, it should not have been allowed in the first place. CCP was responsible to look at it and report such activities, but they passed this responsibility to local governments, which were clearly benefiting from such real estate pyramid schemes or activities carried out by the real estate companies. You might not know that in China, one of the biggest earning sources of local governments is by leasing lands to developers like Evergrande. The more risk that these developer companies were taking, the higher the bid will be on the lands that the local government is leasing out. The amount of revenue generated from leasing out the land by the local government of China was 50%. It is the same government which was supposed to safeguard its citizens from such gambling schemes, rather than benefiting from the same at the cost of its citizens, which is called perverse incentive. Better not to get into the rate of corruption that goes on in the cases of land allotment. CCP, to an extent, tried to control the situation by implementing the 3 red lines policies for the property developers, but it was already very late for them to do so. As a result, the debt burden started increasing and weighing on China's Evergrande Group. Interestingly, the shady practices of Evergrande don't stop here. This company listed those who build houses as the assets under the balance sheets of their company to secure more loans from the banks so they can finish construction. How can you consider the houses already sold to others as the assets of your company? Now, you would probably bang your head on your computer after getting to know that Evergrande was not the only developer company which was carrying out such shady practices. Rather, all the developer companies of China were doing the same thing. The only way to survive in that over-leveraging sector was to keep growing as much as one can, which was impossible once the people lost trust in the company. You are right in your guess. That's exactly what happened recently in China. That is, once the company misses a payment, chaos follows. Last year, one of the subsidiary companies of Evergrande defaulted to make the payment on its loan, and people started looking for its financial statements. That's when the company started collapsing massively. As soon as the news broke out that a company as big as Evergrande could default on a $300 billion loan, a huge hue and cry took place in the country. People of China started realizing that this problem is not limited only to Evergrande, but rather the whole real estate sector is highly indebted and has started crumbling. The Chinese developers owed around $5.3 billion in debt. CCP tried to soften the situation in 2021 by swooping into the situation. Ever since, it hasn't been easy for Evergrande and other developers. The companies are running at a very slow pace as the buildings under construction sold in 2019 are still not completed, and all the funds accumulated from the new sales are getting used up to pay off the debts of the company instead of constructing the buildings. Several buildings had to be torn down because of the delay in the construction process. Eventually, things got much worse as the citizens who invested their savings of a lifetime in those unfinished projects couldn't bear the ongoing situation. As a result, all the buyers of those unfinished buildings which were demolished in central China furnished a letter stating to stop paying the mortgage payments to the bank unless the construction restarts. Now you must be wondering why stopping one project, which could hardly have 1,000 unfinished houses, would be such a great deal for the country of China having billions of population. It is because the demolition process just didn't stop at one project. By the very evening of the announcement of such a protest, the homebuyers from another project announced the same mortgage boycott, and it became a movement observed all over the country. Now home buyers of more than 300 real estate projects in China are protesting not to pay the mortgage amount until the construction resumes. 1 million of people has defaulted in payment of their mortgage in respect of the protest, and in order to attract the attention of the government. These unfinished projects represent more than $100 billion worth of debt that Chinese banks are holding. With people protesting in real estate developing industries, making default on the payment of loans is not a good sign for China's banking sector. The more concerning issue for the banks and the government of China is not just the $1 billion of debt, but the increasing number of people joining the protest to boycott the mortgage payment. CCP, in order to curb the fatality of the situation, has already instructed the banks and news institutions to stop publishing the data and reports about the mortgage boycotts. Unfortunately, Chinese banks are going through an existential crisis because of these boycotts, a crisis that has the capability of being 100 times worse than the one that American banks went through in 2008. The only difference between the 2008 crisis and the present one is that in the present case, the loans are collateralized by the yet-to-be-built houses. Banks can't take possession of this house. All they could do is try to decrease the defaults in payment, and an increase in such defaults might lead the bank to fold. The only way banks can survive is by holding the trust of their depositors. Because of such frequent defaults by the borrowers, America enacted strict banking regulations regarding lenders after the 2008 crisis. Now that the default is increasing in paying the mortgage money by the homebuyers, there are high chances that the Chinese bank will lose the trust of their lenders. Anyways, putting limits on the withdrawals is not enough, as if more and more people start withdrawing their deposits from the bank, then bank run happens, and it collapses. The CCP is worried because the Chinese economy is massively reliant on the real estate and financial sector. 30% of Chinese GDP is represented by real estate, and 7 out of 10 biggest companies are financial institutions in China. This is why, when the news of the boycott came out, CCP held an emergency meeting with the banks to discuss the risks of such happenings. To help the developer companies, CCP is planning to put $1 trillion into real estate companies to help them finish off the construction. If you have any questions, do let us know in the comments section. We will get back to you with another video of information on the same. CCP thinks that this is a political issue rather than a financial crisis, but with the increasing number of protesters, the tone of CCP officials have changed. Let's hope that our video is not suppressed by the Chinese bots, as the news of such boycotts is. So that was it from our side, and we will see you in our next video.